Why it matters that we study the past. When we look at scholarship and understanding the collapse of societies, what we usually see is human resilience. It's not like everybody dies. People survive. It's the upper crust of society that disappears. It's the palaces, it's the political structures, it's the major temples, it's the monuments, it's the art. Normal people survive. And so what I want to say is, if you are wealthy and you're listening to this and you're worried about societal collapse, don't go and try to hide from it. You need to invest in our society. That is what your wealth and status is based upon, is our society itself. So you need to invest in the resilience of the people around you and not thinking that you can protect yourself. Because if you look at history, go read these books. Eric Klein's book comes out tomorrow. Guy Middleton's book goes all over the world and looks at collapse. It is the rich and the elites who get eaten.
It sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah.
It sounds like rich people better put your money back into society.
Exactly.
Or we're fucked.
There is no targeted search for the possibility of a lost civilization, because archaeology is already convinced that no such thing could have existed. And it doesn't, I think, allow archaeologists to lay such claim to the past that they can absolutely rule out any possibility of a lost civilization.
Why do we have so much evidence for ephemeral hunter-gatherers but not evidence from an advanced civilization? So I would expect, though, if you're going to make an argument for something like Yonaguni, that it would look like architecture. Maybe even the type of architecture that you have.
Looks like megalithic architecture to me. Looks like rock-hewn architecture. It looks like the rock-hewn areas at Sacsayhuaman, but they're also huge rock-cut areas with steps in them.
It wasn't a tool.
You don't think that's a tool?
No.
What do you think that is?
I think it's natural again. That looked absolutely nothing like any human-made tool I've ever seen.
Boy, that piece looks like a tool to me. Calling it a road is an unfortunate term.
We don't know what it is, but it's what it is a series of megalithic blocks laid out side by side. But I'm just.
Do you know what would convince me?
What?
So I used to do a lot of GIS for archaeological projects where I'd take historical maps and I'd try to line them up with actual terrain like satellite imagery and stuff like that. You should work on georectifying these maps to see how they line up in real space.
A site, you can't just wake up one morning with no prior skills, no prior knowledge, no background in working with stone and create something like Göbekli Tepe. To me, it very strongly speaks of a lost civilization transferring their technology, their skills, their knowledge to hunter-gatherers. And if I were a survivor of this civilization, I would head for hunter-gatherers and I would try and make my home amongst them so that I could have some hope of surviving. And that's all that I'm suggesting, is that a civilization which had quite advanced astronomy, which was able to map the world, had a knowledge of longitude. I'm not saying they had machines. I'm not saying they had motor cars. I'm not saying they sent spaceship to the moon. I'm saying that they were destroyed at the end of the Ice Age, that there were a very small number of survivors, that those survivors settled amongst other hunter-gatherer peoples and benefited from their knowledge and exchanged knowledge with them. I am not saying that they introduced agricultural products to those people. I'm not saying they brought agriculture from where they came from. I'm saying that they helped to nurture the idea of agriculture amongst those people. I think that there's something odd about the Younger Dryas episode. And to me, that's something odd when I combine it with mythology from all around the world about the destruction of a great civilization in a global cataclysm, about the fact that there were a few survivors, about the suggestion that they traveled around the world sharing their knowledge and ideas.
You can see how these oral traditions change over time anyway, even without being conquered, right? You can see, for example, the weapons, the spears and the shields that Homeric heroes used. Sue Sherritt has an article on this. And so, you can see how Achilles' spear changes its description from a big Bronze Age style spear, the kind of spear that we see in Bronze Age graves. And then the next line, he has a smaller Iron Age style spear, the kind of thing that we see painted on Iron Age pots.
I'm interested by things like this. I don't know what to make of them. These are Olmec figures from Trezopotes. In the center is a picture of Pharaoh Khafre wearing the Nemes headdress, and I'm just intrigued by the fact that these Olmec figures wear a very similar headdress to that.
What do you make of the what looks like ancient drill marks and all these different bizarre ways it seems like they were carving the stones out that's kind of inexplicable?
Yeah, see, I'm not sure if I'd say it's inexplicable. You oftentimes see those drill marks, and so they're not as precise as some people always claim on online and stuff like that.
Not just that they were precise, but that it required a drill that moves at an insane speed.
Well, I think it required
And
a lot of
insanely
sand. It was the
hard.
abrasion of the sand that actually did that. And so it's the sand itself is just slowly abrading down the granite.
With a core, but
Yeah.
coring it. Like, what would you use to do that?
A drill made of copper or bronze, and then sand and water. Yeah,
Has that ever been shown to be possible to do that?
I
to
think
have
it's
that kind of
Scientists
results?
Against Myths on YouTube that has
They've done those core samples, like they've dug into the stone
they've
like
drilled
that.
into granite like that. Yeah,
I know that they tried to cut them, and it took a long ass time.
Oh, yeah.
I saw it.
For a long time, Atlantis was used as a colonial justification by the Crown of Spain for claiming land in the New World. With the book on Atlantis by Ignatius Donnelly, it described this as this kind of global superpower that was, European and that was responsible for these monuments in indigenous areas. It stripped credit away from local cultures of their heritage.
Right.
There's major threats to archaeology that are going on in the world right now. There was just a major BBC article from yesterday. Wales, where I am right now, there's a 20% across the board cut to cultural heritage in Wales. They're talking about closing the National Museum. Graham, I think you and me can agree that archaeological research is important. You could not do the research you do without the kind of cultural heritage initiatives that happen.
I couldn't do any of the work I do without
Yeah.
the work that's been done by archaeologists.
And
And I've said that on Joe's show multiple times.
The more rapid a destruction is, the better it preserves for us, just like with sea level rise.
Right, but dependent upon how strong the force is, right?
hard to
And if
imagine
there's
how-
something.
It's hard
But if
to
it's a
imagine how-
global catastrophe, how is it so strong everywhere, yet it's not wiping out our evidence from hunter-gatherers at this exact same time?
Abu Huraira is a fascinating site, and it was hit by an airburst. According to the team working on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, Abu Huraira, the destruction of Abu Huraira took place because one of those comet fragments 12,800 plus years ago exploded over Abu Huraira within 100 or 200 miles of Göbekli Tepe. Here's the Great Pyramid. Now, I'll give you some statistics. It's 481.39 feet high originally. It's a bit lower today. It lost some 30 feet from its top in an earthquake. Footprint of the base, 13.1 acres. Weight, 6 million tons. 2.3 million blocks. Lost casing stones also came off in that earthquake. 115,000 of them weighing 10 tons each, covering an area of 22 acres. Angle of slope is 52 degrees. And this monument is aligned to within 3/60ths of a single degree of true north. It's not only aligned almost precisely to true north, it's placed very close to latitude 30, 1/3 of the way between the equator and the North Pole. And most mysteriously of all, if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, which is a precessional number, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by the same number, you get the equatorial circumference of.
If we want to get into some of the math about the pyramid, and I checked it in different kinds of things. If you do it in feet or you do it in a metric system, it works, right? Wait a second, can we find this elsewhere? So I went to my own backyard, the Parthenon in Greece. And the Parthenon has 46 inner columns plus 23 outer columns for a total of 69 columns. And then you can multiply 69 by 576,000, which is also a precessional number of 72 times 8,000, and you get 39,744,000, which is 99.17% accurate to the global circumference of the Earth. The reality is that math is there to find relationships between numbers, and so we can go and find those very easily. We have no evidence of any kind of intensive agriculture. You have to imagine that a pollen core is actually tracking a larger landscape, right? Because pollen travels really far. And so you're able to, with one core, track a much larger landscape and put that together. And so what we do know is all this kind of natural evidence about the climate, about the ecology, and about how domestication actually happens. There's no agriculture at all in the Ice Age. And what the heck is the difference between wild and domesticated wheat? It's the scar. Right where that wheat kernel or the spikelet that the wheat seed is attached on, it attaches to the plant. And the reason for this is in wild plants like wheat or beans or peas, it's going to propagate itself by falling off the plant easily. As soon as humans start gathering it, that does nothing. because some seeds fall, it replants itself in the field. But as soon as humans start gathering it and planting it in new fields, then all of a sudden there's an evolutionary sort of impact on the plant itself. And so what's selected for is the mutation for a seed that hangs onto the plant. Do you see what I mean? Because you're cutting off the plant, taking it with you, and then planting it somewhere else. As soon as there's one seed that's like that with that mutation, it slowly proliferates every single time humans replanted it in a new field. It's the first sign of human domestication.
But is it possible that this cycle of domesticating wheat and beans and all these different things has taken place many, many times? And that if you left them alone, they would go back to the wild form, where if there was a disaster and people stopped growing them in this particular region, how long would it take for them to revert back to their original state?
Thousands of years again.
Thousands of years.
How do we know that these radiocarbon dates with the blocks in the pyramid relate to the Sphinx itself? Because the Sphinx is just hewn out of natural stone, right? These different layers here. So the reason we know is because geochemists have done stone sourcing on the chemistry of these stones in the pyramids. And they've been able to trace them to different quarries at Giza.
What is the oldest construction that we're aware of in Egypt?
I mean, we have Neolithic buildings that go back, 8,000 years or something, 9,000 years. Yeah.
I think the oldest construction that we're aware of in Egypt is the Great Sphinx and the megalithic temples in front of it. That's my view.
What do you make of the hieroglyphs that show kingdoms going back 30,000 years?
I've never heard that, so I have no comment.
It's in all the king lists of the.
Oh, you mean the dating of that? Yeah, well, so there's a lot of issues with the way that those are dated because they're not precisely dated. It's just generations. So it's about how you interpret that kind of stuff. But it becomes an issue of mythology. Are they adding in extra generations there and stuff like that?
Or are they actually reporting their truthful memory of their past?
Well, but we'd want to have directly dated evidence of that.
You might want to have that.
I think if we're going to talk about archaeological evidence, we need directly dated stuff.
And one of the things that's fascinating about Egypt is the discovery of older construction methods that are below, and very sophisticated, below the surface, that the different temples were built on previous construction.
I mean, that happens in every culture, where you see sort of spaces being reused in different ways.
Right.
Temple of Horus at Edfu, where the Atlantis story is told in an ancient Egyptian context, is a good example of that, because the Temple of Horus at Edfu is just the latest incarnation.
There's so many different ways to move large stones. There's been so many different experiments that show with rollers or ropes, you can get enough people and know-how, levers, and you can do that. And so, there's so many videos on YouTube of Wally Wallington and others that show you how you can move stones weighing many, many, many tons.
Between 12,900 and 12,800 years ago, a very dramatic climate episode occurred, and that's called the Younger Dryas. The world had been gradually warming up before that, and then suddenly it went very, very cold. There is evidence of a 6-meter sea level rise, but it looks like that was due to impacts on the ice cap, on the North American ice cap, and perhaps on the European ice cap. The evidence for the Younger Dryas impact is found in what are called impact proxies, and that's iridium, nanodiamonds, platinum, melt glass like trinitite, found in sites across a vast area of the Earth's surface. I'm simply proposing that the survivors of a civilization who were in very small numbers, traveled around the world seeking refuge, sharing their knowledge with those they took refuge amongst. It was an exchange, not a one-way trip, and they did not bring plants and seeds with them. They worked with what was locally available. And that Sphinx looks over the Nile Valley. That's the Nile Valley we're looking at. And the Great Sphinx is oriented perfectly due east. We've talked about the erosion of the Sphinx. This is the view from the back of the Sphinx's head. If you were there at the summer solstice, you would see the sun rising very far to the left, far to the north of east. If you were there at the winter solstice, you'd see the sun rising very far to the south of east. But if you're there on the spring equinox, you see the Sphinx is looking directly at the rising sun.
I think the issue with the lion facing Leo rests on that assumption. So obviously it's facing the sunrise. It even aligns reasonably well with the equinox. But we don't have any examples of, say, a constellation sign facing another constellation sign.
And here's Robert Bauval's Orion correlation. And one of Robert's strongest critics is Ed Krupp from the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, who doesn't accept the correlation. Nevertheless, he does accept that according to the pyramid text, the pharaoh rose to the stars as Orion. Egyptian astronomy recognized Orion, at least his belt, as the celestial incarnation of Osiris. And what confronts us at Giza, in my view, is a three-dimensional representation of the sky of about 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. We have the Sphinx looking due east at the constellation of Leo. At the moment the sun bisects the horizon, we find that the constellation of Orion is sitting due south on the meridian with its three belt stars in the same pattern as the three great pyramids on the ground. And not only that, but precession has caused the orientation of the belt stars to change. In 2500 BC, they were in the wrong orientation. 10,500 BC, they're in the right orientation.
And look, archaeologists, what we find is what we publish, right? We are not trying to keep stuff hidden. If I found Atlantis, I would publish Atlantis. Klaus Schmidt found Göbekli Tepe. He published Göbekli Tepe. And so I think that that's really important. We want to change and rewrite history.